Welcome everybody. My name is Jeremy. I think I've met everybody. Nice to meet you. So I have some pretty cool stuff that I'm pretty excited to show you. Real quick, let me just get a show of hands of who in this room has used an Amazon Alexa or an Echo or even a Google Home assistant or something like that.
This will be the one thing I can.
Okay, that's great.
Just got a whole bunch of them for Christmas.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
yeah. So you got like the house is like wired with like smart lights and everything.
Yeah, we've got like 3 light bulbs and 3 plug devices that we control.
Yeah,
It's pretty fun.
that's cool. That's cool. I want to do that at some point. I just have my one. Well, so I'm going to be talking about a couple different things tonight. The first primary thing I'm going to hit on just a little bit is just FileMaker API. Speaking generally about it. So this, came out new for FileMaker 16, and it has somewhat limited functionality, but we understand that's going to be expanded fairly soon. Right now, using FileMaker API, we're able to log in and out of hosted solutions, create, edit, and delete records. You can also get record sets, perform find requests, and then you can also set global values. Now, when I first heard about this coming out, I was at DevCon when they announced like FileMaker API, and everyone was really excited. And I was kind of like, yeah, that's really cool. We all know exactly why we're excited about this, and inside I was thinking, I'm struggling to really find why I'm personally excited. I'm thinking if I'm a web developer or I'm doing development in some other platform, that's really cool, right? Because particularly I'm thinking web development. If I need to tie back in and grab some information out of the FileMaker database, that's cool. Got a new API I can do that with. But with me, I'm primarily FileMaker Developer, and particularly in the job I'm in, when customers come to me and they want to integrate with some outside service, we're going to go to that service's API, and we're going to tie in using that API. I'm not going to call up QuickBooks and be like, hey, I have an API. Can you tie into it? Like, that's not going to work, right? It's going to be up to me to tie into them. So as someone who works primarily in FileMaker, I was struggling with how do I position this to customers in a way that's like a selling point. There may be some niche customer that comes to me with something like maybe they have a website and they want to tie in and grab stuff. We can do that. But just in general, I was struggling to really figure out a way that I can position this and be like, by the way, we can do this now. And that's a new thing with FileMaker 16. And we can, maybe we can improve your experience with it. So over, the weeks and months following that, I came back and I was thinking about it a few more times. And right around that time, I ended up purchasing an Echo Dot, Amazon Echo Dot. They were on sale for like $39.99 or something like that on Amazon. I was like, well, shoot, I'll get one of those. It's no big deal. Got it, put it in my house, started messing around with it. Found that I can control my lights with it. I can control my thermostat with it. And I was like, that's all. That's cool. That's fun. I'd get on there and ask it, what's the weather today? I can ask it, how many appointments do I have today? It'll look at my Google Calendar and talk to me. I thought that was really cool. And I started finding out, well, you can write custom apps for the Alexa or the Echo Dot. I was like, well, that's cool. So like people can, do custom things and tie into other platforms, and immediately it flashed my mind. You can tie into other platforms like FileMaker. Well, shoot, I can tie into FileMaker API. And so I spent a couple weeks just digging in and trying to find out what does it take to get this kind of thing going. And so what I'm going to be talking about tonight is the results of all that work and show just a real super basic example of what can be done with a custom Alexa app that allows you to communicate and interact with a FileMaker file. So one other thing I want to touch on is Aws Lambda. Does anyone know what that is, what Aws Lambda is?
I looked it up after I got the one.
Yeah. So essentially, it is one of the Amazon Web Services. Okay, it comes when you sign up for an AWS account. It comes as part of a really big list, and this is not all of them. This is just a few that I picked for the graphic here. It comes as one of a really big list of a bunch of different services you can get. Over on the right is a little more extensive list that you would see on the dashboard of your AWS account of all the things that you can use. And specifically what Lambda is, by Amazon's definition, is a compute service that runs your code in response to events and automatically manages and computes resources. So it's basically, it works as a server for you where you can upload code. When you upload code, you do it to something called your Lambda function, and that function can be in Node.js, Java, C++, or Python. And basically, it sits out there as a server. They provide you an endpoint, and when any outside service hits that endpoint, it runs your code. Now, the really cool thing about this, and I'll return to this idea probably a couple times tonight, is this idea of being able to say yes to a client. Even if we're not talking about using an Alexa and Echo Dot like I'm going to show tonight, if a client comes to us and says, "Hey, I need to be able to run this JavaScript code, that's doing some other things, and I need that to kind of interact, but I don't have, the infrastructure to host that. We don't have a server set up. We don't really know how to set up that server. What can we do?" We can point them to Amazon Web Services and to the Lambda function that can host that code. There is no server management. It scales automatically with the amount of traffic, the number of hits that it's getting. If it starts going up, Amazon, without you having to do anything, will steer more compute services to it. And when it's not running, it's 100% free. Now, Lambda itself comes, I'm going to try to explain this so it's clear. When you sign up for the basic free version of an Amazon, of an AWS account, you get Lambda for free for 12 months, okay? You get up to 1 million calls a month. Another way that they'll calculate it, either 1 million calls a month, or I think they said 3.2 million minutes of process time or something like that. Essentially, it's pretty difficult to hit the limit. Now, in addition to being free for that first 12 months, Lambda also falls in within the category of a reduced number of services that are actually always free. So it's kind of weird how they say it. They say, "You're getting this free for 12 months. And then you go to the next screen, it's like, "You're getting this free forever." But so basically, like I said, when you get that free version of an AWS account, you get for life free access to Lambda with up to 1 million calls a month. For most clients that I've had experience with, if this was something they were utilizing, that 1 million calls a month is never going to come anywhere close to being hit. So we're able to position Lambda to clients and say, "Look, we can host that code that you need hosted for free. It doesn't matter how much you need to use it. It will be free forever. And even if your business just explodes, Lambda can support up to thousands of calls a second. And if it gets that high, it's going to scale automatically for them. And then if they happen to go over that 1 million calls a month, it'll just start charging, and it's minuscule amounts per call. Essentially, I didn't look up the actual breakdown of it. You're about to raise your hand. Okay. So this is a great thing. Just in general, as a selling point, something we can position to clients, a way that we can say yes to clients. They say, "Can we do this?" "Yep, we can do it." "How much does it cost?" "It's free." That's really cool. So what I'm going to be demonstrating tonight is one of the ways that we can connect AWS Lambda to FileMaker, and that is using Alexa, or in this case, an Echo Dot. So let's dive in and let's do some fun stuff here. I have got hosted on our server here a very, very basic FileMaker file with just 1,000 records of contacts. We just got first name, last name, city, and state. and a birth date. I also have in another table, I'm calling it the appointments table. It's literally just dates. That's all it is, just a bunch of dates in there. But I'm going to use this and demonstrate some stuff. Now, this is the worst idea ever, to do a voice controlled device in a live demonstration. So bear with me. There's always the chance it just doesn't understand what I'm saying. I've also noticed that sometimes when I reference a date, it'll default to my Google Calendar. Like if I ask it to report about a particular appointment on a date. And this may be because this, the skill kit that I'm running this off of is actually only in testing. It has not been published. So it might be that because it's in testing, it wants to do something that is published if it can. You know, so sometimes it mishears me and it'll report something that doesn't reflect it, but I'll just try it again until we get it to work, but hopefully it'll go smoothly. So let's just try something out here. I'm going to do a search on here. Echo, ask FileMaker, how many people live in the city of St. Louis?
There are 11 people who live in St. Louis.
Let's try another one here. Echo, ask FileMaker, how many people live in the state of Tennessee?
There are 25 people who live in Tennessee.
All right. Let's try some birthdays. Echo, ask FileMaker, how many contacts have a birthday on April 27th?
There are 5 contacts with birthdays on 04/27.
I searched the wrong day, sorry.
Still just as impressive.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll stop doing the searches side by side here. Let's just try a few more things. Echo, ask FileMaker, how many people have the name Laura?
Sorry, I don't know that.
Let's try again. Echo, ask FileMaker, how many people have the name Laura?
There are 8 people with the name Laura.
Echo, ask FileMaker, how many people have the surname Lewis?
There are 7 people with the surname Lewis.
Let's shift over to the appointments table here. Now this is where it might ping my Google Calendar. Let's try it here. Echo, ask FileMaker, how many appointments do I have on July 7th?
You have 4 appointments on 07/07.
Let's see. Okay. Echo, ask FileMaker to add a new appointment on July 7th.
New appointment record created.
Echo, ask FileMaker now how many appointments do I have on July 7th?
There are no events scheduled on Saturday,
That's my
July
Google
7th.
Calendar. Echo, ask FileMaker now how many appointments do I have on July 7th?
You have 5 appointments on 07/07.
All right, so there's a lot going on there, right? I don't know if you caught it, but I'm having it query multiple tables. I'm having it query different fields in those tables, and I'm giving it different formats. I'm giving it text, I'm giving it dates, right? Not only that, but the tables and the fields that I'm calling in different ways. In the table called people in the database, a couple times I asked it to tell me how many people, say, lived in a certain city. Another time I asked it how many contacts live in the city. And not only did it respond correctly, it responded in kind. It said you have 5 contacts.
So notice you also said name and surname, which
Right.
are equated to first and last.
Exactly. The names of those fields is first and last. But I asked for name, and it went to first name. I asked for surname. I could ask for, say, something like given name, or first name, or last name. And not only does it know what I'm talking about, but it responds in kind. It said you have, I think it was 10 people with the surname Lewis, right? So, what are we plugging in here? Oh, my power. Oh, good call. That would be tragic. All right. Let's turn back over to here. Thank you for that. Good call. Would be observant. So to make all this happen, there are 4 four things in play here. We have the Alexa. We have what's called the Alexa Skill Kit. That's what they call the custom app for an Alexa. You have Aws Lambda, and you have FileMaker Server. We have FileMaker Server 16 here hosting the file with API access opened up, and the SSL certificate installed. This one I think is a real one. It will work off of just the built-in test one. Yeah, it just needs to have an SSL.
And a public IP, I suppose, associated to it, or
Yeah, public IP, yeah, to be able to point to. So the first step that's happening here, obviously, is the Alexa talking to the skill kit. So let's dive into the skill kit. So this is my Amazon developer account, which you can sign up for free. The AWS account is also for free. And you don't have to register a whole new account. If you have an existing Amazon account, you're not changing it into a developer account. You're just kind of tagging developer onto it. It doesn't change anything else about your account, tied to your Amazon Prime and everything. That stays the same. It just tags on the developer part to it. And that's for free. So I'm in the developer console here of my Amazon account. And it might ask me to relog in here. Yeah. So I'm going to go to the Alexa section of the console and then down to my skill kits. This is the Ask FileMaker skill kit. And the part that we're interested in right now is the interaction model. So an Alexa skill kit is broken down into intents. An intent is basically an action that you want it to carry out, something you intend for it to do. So you can see I have an intent down here called Ask FileMaker. Intents are broken down into slots. Each slot is assigned one slot type, and each slot type can have multiple values. Okay, so let's dive into one of these. The first slot for my Ask FileMaker intent is my table slot, and the slot type for my table slot is my table list. So I can come down here to my slot types. And in my table list, I have two tables, appointments and people. I also have synonyms for those. Appointments can also be called meetings or meeting or appointment singular. For people, I've got contact, person, contacts. Other ways that I want the Alexa skill kit to hear me reference that particular slot. When you're putting in values here, you're basically, the best way to think about it is you're putting in magnet words. Here's my field list, right? So we can see for last name, for last, which is the real name of the field, I have surname, last name. For first, I've got given name, or first name. You're basically putting in magnet words. You're putting in the words that the skill kit is going to try to have heard you say. If you get close to one of those words or synonyms, it's going to say you said this. Now, it will still hear other things, right? So like on the table name, or the table list rather, I can come up and say, tell me how many gatherings I have on a certain date. And you can actually look at the log of what the Alexa heard you to have said. There's another place you can go and see all of that. And it'll understand you said gatherings. It understood you, but it doesn't know what to do with it. In particular, down the line, when we're looking at the Lambda function and what it's doing, it doesn't understand the word gatherings, right? But it's going to try to hear one of these. I also messed around with trying to mispronounce appointments. I would say like, how many appointments, something like that. And it was just ridiculous sounding, but it was close enough that it's like, you said appointments, right? It's gonna try to hear one of those things. I have a few other slots in here. I have one particular for date, one for states, one for cities. And for those three in particular, like the city one, I'm actually using the built-in Amazon slot types. So we have Amazon City, which has already indexed for you by Amazon, again, for free, 15,000 different US cities. So I don't have to go in there and put in all these city names that someone might say. Amazon's done that work for me. They also do it for states. All 50 states in the US are already indexed in there and can be entered as a slot type. Now the date one is really cool. The date one, they have done some serious work on let me pull up my FileMaker again. They've done some serious work on the date so that they're already accounting for lots of different ways that people will say dates. So let's see if I can do this. Echo, ask FileMaker to add a new appointment on April 1st.
New appointment record created.
Echo, ask FileMaker to add a new appointment 10 days from today. Again. Echo, ask FileMaker to add a new appointment 10 days from today.
New appointment record created.
Echo, ask FileMaker to add a new appointment 9 weeks from today.
New appointment record created.
You can even get really fancy with it. Echo, ask FileMaker to add a new appointment 142 days after 17 days ago.
New appointment record created.
So, and we can check and see if that's right. What was it, 142 days after 17 days ago? Echo, what is the date 142 days after 17 days ago?
142 days after January 6, 2018 is May 28, 2018.
There we go. So that just takes like all of that work out of like how many different ways do people say dates? How many different ways do they try to look up dates? And they've already taken care of that with that date slot type. So that is extremely, extremely useful. So what you have to do when you have these built out with your slots and your slot types and all your different values is you have to actually tell it the sample utterances. This is the order these things are going to be coming into you. And this can get a little bit hairy, again, because of all the different ways that someone might request something. I was surprised to find out how many different ways that I would ask for birthdays. You know, how many people have birthdays on? How many people have a birth date on? How many people have birthdays that fall on? Just all different ways that someone might just ask something as simple as tell me who has birthdays on a certain date, right? So you have to account for those. And again, these work a little bit like magnet phrases, but they're a little bit stricter than the slot types are. You can leave out a word, even if it's a small word like the or of, and it might not register correctly. So you really do have to come up with a lot of different ways. So like a couple of these, this would be like how many contacts or how many people have birthdays on date, right? That's the sentence accounting for that way to say it. How many people have birthdays May 5th? Maybe you didn't say the word on.
Tomorrow, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, how many people?
Sorry, I may have missed this. So you're saying that people is the name of the table.
People's the name of the table, right?
So if you had other tables that were whatever, dogs,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd be able to say how many dogs.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say maybe you had a context or a customer's table and a supplier's table. How many customers have orders due, whatever? How many suppliers have orders due? And it could reference that because you're referencing that table slot, right? So you really have to do quite a bit of work to account for the different ways that someone's going to ask for something. Now, I put together just a few of the ways that I tended to ask for things on my very, very simple database, right? If you're talking a full business solution and you've got Joe Boss who's like, tell me how many orders I had 3 days ago. You know, he's like, and he might say it like that one time, he's like, what's the total of orders I had 3 days ago? Like he's going to ask it lots of different ways, and he's not going to want to have to like refer to a cheat sheet of like, how do I ask it for number of orders? He's not going to want to do that. He's just going to talk to it, and it's going to be responsive. So there's quite a bit of work that's going to go into accounting for all the different ways that a human might say something. Now,
Can I interject here a question, Jeremy? You mentioned earlier that there was a log that was keeping track of what was actually being heard, I guess, or interpreted from Alexa. Does that, can you use that to help develop these sample utterances?
Yeah. Let me actually pull that up. I think I can get to that fairly.
I was wondering if that was helpful to you as you were developing your.
So Alexa on my the app on my phone, I assume that's what you're talking about, that you can go through the list and it shows you what you asked.
Yeah, your prompt looks just like that.
It even says, did Alexa understand what you wanted?
Yeah.
You can say yes or no, and I assume that in the background, they're using that as a tool to.
Yeah, Amazon will use that as a quality check tool. It doesn't actually do anything with my skill kit. It doesn't teach my skill kit to be better. But yeah, so you can see that last thing I requested. That was just to echo. If we look before that, you can see here it's shown that I did the Ask FileMaker skill kit. So it recognizes that, and we can see.
So I'm wondering if you had this published, would you get any of this feedback? So in other words, if somebody else is using your skill on, if you were published and somebody else uses skill, if they were answering these questions, I wonder if you would have access to the feedback of them answering yes or no, that it did what I wanted.
Like in your
That way you
vertical
could,
market.
you could obviously go in and
yeah.
change the phrases or add.
I see what you're saying. I don't know. I think that yes or no data just goes to Amazon. I don't know of a way that I can actually grab that, but it may be possible. And speaking of publishing, by the way, I'm not going to get into the process of publishing. By default, if you publish a skill kit, it goes out on the market. So anyone could download it and start using it if they, for some reason, decided to. But it is possible to publish privately. You can do Alexa for Business is what it's called. There's a whole API that's like layered on top of it, basically where you're hosting the skill kit code, you're on your own and you have to use API to do it. I didn't want to try to do that for this presentation, but again, the ability to say yes to client, yeah, we can host, it is possible for you to host a private skill kit that only your business is going to be able to use. It's not out there on the market where anyone can ask what your sales are. But yeah, I haven't dove in to see where this goes. My thought is this just goes to Amazon in some way or another.
It'd be really useful though. So what I'm thinking about is one thing that I tried using is a skill called Our Groceries. And I'm trying to get my wife to use it, and she, for whatever reason, always says the wrong thing. And I always think, God, it'd be really nice if there was a way to give them like really good feedback on what people are saying versus what they're supposed to say.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice if they could kind of tweak it.
Yeah.
It's actually a really good Saturday Night Live.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. The old people use it. We'll do that last year at the presentation. We'll watch it. Okay. So yeah, so that's the skill kit. Any questions about building out the slot types, other kind of stuff to do? There's lots more Amazon available slot types that can be used for lots of different things. But before we move on from this,
Just a real quick question, yeah, and I'll let you move on. So essentially, any table, as far as FileMaker database is concerned, any table you're dealing with or any field you're dealing with, you'd want to have some kind of mapping going on in this case.
Well, you wouldn't have to map each table individually. You'd have a slot for tables.
A slot, okay.
And then you'd have in the values for the table slot, you'd have all your different tables available with all the synonyms that they might be referred to.
Think of it like Mad Libs.
Yeah, but
It's all exactly
I
Mad
like
Libs.
that.
Yeah, it is long. So the skill kit takes in this information that you're sending it, and it's going to put it into essentially Node.js that it's going to then send out to, in our case, the Lambda function. Let me just give you a heads up of kind of what that looks like. So this is another way that you can test a skill kit if you don't actually have an Alexa or an Echo Dot. You can come in here and you can type things. Live in the city of Memphis. What did I misspell? How many people live in the city of Memphis? Yeah, I misspelled city and messed it up. Now, testing on this is not 100% reliable because you're always going to say exactly like what you meant, right? It's if at all possible, it's best to test with voice, but this can show what we're trying to show it. So what it's sending from this information, I'm going to come down here. So it's got these, you can see our slots here that's coming across in this Node.js. In this case, there was no date referenced. Value state was not referenced. Names was not referenced. The field, it picked up I wanted city. The city that it heard, or the city that it saw me type in this case, was Memphis. And the table it recognized as people. So it's sending this information in this Node.js off to the Lambda function, which is, jump back over here. The next step. So it takes that, bundles it all nice and pretty based on what it heard you say, sends it off to Lambda. And the Lambda function, let's jump over here. This is the dashboard of my AWS account. So I'm just going to jump to Lambda here, and I have my list of functions. We want FileMaker API. And let's dive into the code. Now, the really cool thing about the Lambda function is that it has already built into it the ability to be triggered from an Alexa skill kit when you're building the Lambda new for the first time. You can just come over here, select Alexa skill kit. You plug in the ID of that skill kit, which is available back on the developer console. And it says, okay, got it. I'm listening for that skill kit. Which is just really cool. It's all really nice and user friendly. Now, I want to say, first of all, for anyone that does JavaScript in the room, I don't know JavaScript. Okay, this work is the result of me finding samples of people doing other things with Lambda, just looking up on Google, asking my brother-in-law, who's a freaking mad JavaScript genius, just like trying to like piece this together. So there's no doubt in my mind that you could organize this better. In fact, as I was doing it, as I kind of started to get a little more familiar with it, I was like, man, I really should just put all these together and organize. No, I'm not going to do that. It works. I'm not going to touch it. It works. So there's probably some sloppy stuff in here, but we're going to break down basically what's happening. So don't ask me any difficult questions about like what the particular things on the JavaScript. I don't know what to answer, but I'll show you what I can show. So we can see here the launch request is coming in. Here's the launch request from the Alexa skill kit. It also here's the intent. So the launch request it's basically set up there so that you can actually break out the launch and the intent. So you could say, if you wanted to do it this way, echo ask FileMaker and then say nothing, and it would come back with what do you want FileMaker to do. And then you could actually, my code doesn't do this, but you could set the code in a listen state, waiting for that intent to come in. Now, the way I've been using it, I've been doing launch request and intent just right back to back. Ask FileMaker, blah, 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 and it's going in. So it immediately here's a launch request and then intent request right after, right? I could probably actually show you. You can see here on the launch request, the help reprompt is what it could potentially say back. So if I come here and say, I want it to say, what do you need? That's what it's going to respond with if I don't give it any intent. Echo, ask FileMaker.
What do you need?
So you can have it respond that. Now, like I said, my code doesn't put it in a listen state. I can't now give it the request. It wouldn't understand it. But you could write JavaScript that basically once it had heard that launch request, then it's waiting, listening for what your intent is. So when the intent is heard, it jumps to the ask FileMaker function. Now the ask FileMaker function does a couple things right off the bat. First of all, it wants to know what the spoken action was. Now, in the case of this one, what it's doing when it looks like this, it's looking in this Node.js to see if there's any value in the action slot at all. If there is one, if it sees one, it assigns that. If it doesn't see one, it just uses the find. Now, the reason I'm getting an action is because when we call FileMaker API, when you do the actual request, you're referencing a different endpoint. So here's authorization. I go there to log in. But when I'm performing my action, I'm either putting find, so API/find/people, or API/record/people. So what I have this one doing is if you hear me say add, like when I asked it to add a new appointment, if it hears add in that action slot, it puts in record. Let me scroll back up here. Spoken action, here we go. The API options will get filled out based on what spoken action it hears. If it hears me say add, then the API option is record. If it hears me say delete, it's record. If it hears me say remove, it's record. Otherwise, it's just doing find. And you would probably have to go a little more detail on that based on how complex of your solution it was, but that's what I had it doing. It's either just going to record or to find in its API call.
And you'd never want to default to delete, right?
Right. Well, actually, delete. Yeah, there's no delete. Delete it's record is how you interact with records at all. It's API/record/whatever.
Got it.
Yeah.
We'll save it.
Yeah. So then we come in here and we're just going to figure out what table you're talking about. The spoken table, which you pretty much always have to provide it. So I don't have a condition on if it exists or not. It's just find what value is in the table slot. And then it's got to account for what it might have heard me say. If I said appointment, appointments. If I said contact, that's people. Contacts is people. Person is people. It's making a decision based on what it heard come in from the skill kit on what that actually means to FileMaker. So in all the work that you do on the Alexa skill kit to account for all the different ways that someone can say something, you've got to reverse engineer back here and say, if they say that, they mean this, right? If they say contacts, they mean people. If they say person, they mean people. All the different things have to be accounted for.
So the skill kit's not necessarily converting the input or what it heard as appointment to date and kind of normalizing an output. You're still having to do it.
Still having to do it. The skill kit is minimizing the number of different things that it can hear you say, so you're not just off the rails saying anything. It kind of narrows down that potential things it can say, but all of those things have to be accounted for in the function.
So I have a quick question about two things that you kind of touched on here. So person equals people, and I forget what you called it, where you said Alexa ask FileMaker, and then you stopped, and it said, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to say something like, Alexa, add a new person to my database, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or Alexa, ask FileMaker to add a new person, and then have it say, what is a person's first name?
Yes.
And then what is a person's second name or last name, and have it sort of ask you for the info that it needs?
Yeah, absolutely. It's similar to how you put it in that listen state again. There's where you can create, and I'm sure there's plenty of stuff on GitHub to show how to do it with a Lambda function to have multiple staged interactions where it does exactly that. You say, add a new person. What's the person's name? Jeremy Upton. Where does Jeremy Upton live? Memphis, Tennessee. Yeah. And you could do that. It would take a lot more code than I have here.
Sure.
But yeah, absolutely, you could do that. So we do a similar thing with the fields. I'm saying, if you heard me say a field, which I don't always, sometimes I didn't say, I wouldn't say add a new appointment on date January 1st. I just said add a new appointment on January 1st because that's how human says it. So I say if there is a field that you recognized, grab that field name. Otherwise, in the case of my solution, I'm referring to a date. So just call it date if you get nothing else. And then I have to account for all the different things. If they said name, that means first. First name, that means first. That's the real FileMaker field name. If I said surname, that's last. If I said birthdays, that's birthday. Date of birth, birthday. I have to account for all those different ways that I can potentially say it and plug it into the correct FileMaker field. The date one, if it hears me say a spoken date, I have it doing a couple different things. Basically, let's look at it from right here. If the field was date and I'm telling it to add, so we're talking about my appointments table. If I'm telling it to add a date, then it takes that, what it interpreted as the correct date, and it takes the dashes out and replaces them with forward slashes because that's how I want it formatted in my FileMaker database. Okay, I'm just doing text editing there. If I'm talking about a date field, but I'm doing a find, that's where I'm looking for an appointment or I'm looking for a birthday. I have it take, basically I'm taking this substring of the date that it heard. I'm basically taking the year out and replacing that year with dash asterisk. in my example, I didn't want to worry about years. When I add an appointment, it just does it in 2018. When I look for a birthday, it doesn't worry about what year the birthday was. It just wants to know the day and month. And so I have it just plugging in that text value of, it's going to do day, month, and then dash asterisk, and that's what's sending to FileMaker. So I'm doing just a little text parsing and editing in there to make it how I want it to do it. With birthday, again, I don't care about the year, so I'm plugging that in. Then the rest of the things for this content, this is basically, the first part of this content section is looking for dates, how to treat dates. But if the content was something other than a date, if it's a name, if it's a city, if it's a state or whatever, it's going to look and see, okay, is what you're getting a name? Is what you're getting a state, or is what you're getting a city? And again, it knows that because of the Node.js that's coming in from the skill kit. Right here, we can see the value city had a value. And so it's able to look and see if value city had a value at all. This is actually the if statement right here. If anything existed in value city, then that's what you want. Otherwise, if something existed in the state one, then that's what you want, or in the name one, that's what you want. A lot more logic probably would need to be going to this for a more complex solution. For mine, just really simple. Did I want a city? Did I want a state? Or did I want a name? Just figure one of those out. Or did I want some kind of variation on a date? That's what these above are. From there, there are 3 API calls that happen with every instance here. Let me jump back over to this. Just progress our thing here. Now we're going from Lambda to FileMaker. There are 3 API calls that happen every time the Lambda gets pinged. There's the login, there's the, what I call the action, which is either the query or the app in this case, and then the logout. So you can leave that API session open on FileMaker, which may maybe have some uses or whatever. I chose to just do what you need to do, log out. The way I have them built in JavaScript, and this is probably where someone that knows more in JavaScript than me would be able to do it better, I simply have them nested within each other. Because, for example, when I log in, what I get out of that login is a token. I need to display this a little better. I get a token from FileMaker. So here's my login is just hard coded with the password that I want, and it grabs from that the response from FileMaker a token, and it uses that token in the consecutive calls after that. It declares that token into a constant and declares that later, and that's needed for the next 2 calls. And so because I need to save that and the other constants like the table I'm needing and the field I'm needing, that all comes at the beginning, because I need all of the rest of the calls to be able to reference those constants, I have them nested within each other. Basically, the overarching rule with JavaScript is when you declare a constant or a variable, is another way to do it, everything within that function can reference that constant, but outside of that function, it can't. So if you have another one down here, another function, it can't do it. So I have my authorization login that has its constants declared. Inside that is the query, and then inside that is the logout. They're all nested so that they can all reference the constants that got declared above. So that login happens. It's down here at the bottom. It took me a while to wrap my brain around also how JavaScript works, that it doesn't read top to bottom. It's like it reads all at once, and it's like it does everything all at once. So the login is down here at the bottom of the JavaScript, and then you go slightly up, and then you have where it's actually parsing and doing the query, and then above that is the logout, so it's kind of weird. So the login happens after it does that, gets all its token. This is where it comes in and builds out right here is where it's going to build out its query. So it comes in here and it says, okay, if my action, my spoken action was add, then it builds out this Node.js call that it gets sent to FileMaker. It says data in this field, add this content. So it was adding in the date field for the appointments, that content. And the table, by the way, is is determined actually when you, within the endpoint. So if I'm referencing the appointments table, you actually have to call the layout in the API call. So it's like API/record/people, the name of the solution, /appointments, which is the name of the layout actually that I'm referencing. So that's why you don't see table referenced here, because that's actually determined. Let's go to, that's the delete one right here. That's actually determined in the initial call right there. So I have the table value gets plugged in. So it builds out that query. If it's add, then it pulls that one. If I'm doing a find, then it builds out the query for the field that I said and the content. So that could be first, as in the first name and what it heard me say, state, city, whatever that field was, and whatever it heard me say, it sends that query to FileMaker. And then the last one here, I think this was just a default. Yeah, I just left a default one in here. It's actually the same as the query, but it's kind of like the last on a case thing. You have all your things, and then if none of these are true, do this one. And I just had to do the same thing again for ease. So it sends that to FileMaker. And that, of course, is already formatted, with that little parsing that I'm doing there. That's formatted the way that FileMaker wants to see it. Nice. FileMaker turns and responds with Node.js. Okay. So the Lambda receives that response, and it's going to parse that response. So I can actually find that parse. I mean, it's not real critical if I can't find it. I'm not going to worry about it right now. Finding it anyway. It's gonna take that and it basically just parses it. Does make sure it's all formatted nicely in Node.js, and then I can go in and find the things out of it that I need. So I'm referencing actions again. If my action was add, my spoken action was add, then it's going to respond. I build out the sentence that gets spoken back to me. New, whatever table you were talking about, record created. New appointment, record created, right? Now, notice I have it referencing the spoken table, not the actual table. That's where it can respond in kind. If I say add a new contact instead of new people, Alexa will say new contact added instead of new people added, right? For the birthday, there are found count, which I'm basically just taking here we go. The length of the response. So it's just counting the number of responses it got in that query. Because what you're actually getting back from FileMaker is every field of all the records, right? It's sending back to the Lambda the first name, the last name, the city, and the date, and the birthday, and everything. And I'm just counting the number of responses I got. What's cool about that is if you expanded this a little bit, you could actually have it respond with information, not just counts. I could say, where does Jeremy Upton live? And it would do a query for Jeremy Upton, bring in the whole record and response, and say, Jeremy Upton lives in Memphis, Tennessee. And it could read that response, so you just have to use, text parsing in that Node.js to grab the values that you want. I'm just having it count the values that I got. So when I ask for a birthday, it says there are found count, spoken table, whatever I said to it, it says back with birthdays on whatever my content was. Appointment, you have found count, spoken table on content. So that would also mean that if I said how many appointments do I have 142 days after 17 days ago, it would respond with, you have one appointment 142 days after 7 days ago. It would respond with whatever that content was. Well, actually, I take that back. You could do it. You could have it do that. You could take the spoken content and have it respond that way. The way I have it set up, it's going to respond with the actual date out of FileMaker. It'll say, you have one appointment on May 28th or whatever. But I could plug in what it actually heard me say, and then again have it respond in kind. For the people query, there are found count, spoken table with the city, or with the first name, with the surname, with the given name, whatever I said, and then the address. There are found count, spoken table, who live in whatever it is I said. So it takes that, it builds out that human-friendly response, sends that back to the skill kit. I said result count there, found count, basically the same thing. Sends that back to the skill kit, and the skill kit reads it back to the user in human understandable English. And that's the entire cycle. And it happens really fast. I mean, surprisingly fast for everything it's doing. And again, the cool thing with Lambda is it can support thousands of calls a second. If you had, one of the things that I think about with this is if you had a vertical market where you were putting out a solution that was Alexa compatible, you could have one Lambda function hosted for all of your customers. And it could support thousands of calls a second, them all asking about their own databases. Could support that easily. So that's the end of my material.
That was awesome.
Yeah,
Really awesome.
very impressive. I can't wait to do it.
Good news. So I sent you a Dropbox link on Slack.
Yes.
I have a sample file that I made available. It will have in it, well, you can't see these, I can't show you. It will have in it 5 things. One of them is just a read this first kind of thing. I have a couple notes in there I just want to make you aware of. I have the raw code of the Alexa skill kit. There's a place when you can create a new skill kit and just plug in the full exported code from mine, plug it into yours. I have the raw code of the Lambda function. Again, you just create a new Lambda function, plug it in there. I have the sample file, this people file that I was using, this exact sample file that you can host somewhere on FileMaker Server 16. Just make sure API access is available and it's got the SSL working. And I have a 10-minute video that walks you through the whole process of, it assumes that you already have your accounts ready to go. So you have your developer account, you have your AWS account, and you have the FileMaker file hosted. But you watch this 10-minute video, it walks you through the process of creating the skill kit, creating the Lambda function, and at the end of that video, you can start talking to that database. And then just mess around, do whatever you want to do with it.
And you would hammer on some people that gave you
Yeah. Just don't move.
Yeah, well, Jim Dick was insanely busy right now, so I'm sure that he's not.
I have a couple of questions for you, Jeremy.
Yeah.
That maybe we should ask at all of the meetups. One of them is, like, you shared that it has empowered you to be able to say yes to a customer about things.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about, like, what else this taught you? Obviously, going through all those different steps, there's got to be something at the end of that you're going like, I can't wait to, or I wish that we could, and maybe there are a bunch of those.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, where are you right now?
Well, so there was like tons of exposure to JavaScript, right? That's probably the single most personal benefit that I got out of it. I'm of the personal opinion that FileMaker developers are going to very soon need to know JavaScript because there's so much stuff that we're going to be interacting with. Node.js being introduced. We've got the curl that's available now. There's so much more capability built in for us to be able to interact with stuff. Now the stumbling block for someone like me is I don't understand that other stuff. I don't know JavaScript, so it doesn't matter what FileMaker can do. I don't know how to talk to it. So I think JavaScript in particular is one of the languages that pretty soon, if not already, the average FileMaker developer is going to need to at least have some cursory knowledge of. And so this was a great exposure to that for me. I still would say I don't know JavaScript, but I can at least look at it and understand what it's trying to do. And with some Googling and some pecking away, I could probably get it doing what I needed to do. Again, ability to say yes to a customer. We've got some JavaScript that we need to do something. Yeah, we can do that. We can do it.
There was one thing that you mentioned outside of this meeting, but I think it's pertinent to discuss a little bit about what FileMaker's RESTful API is capable of doing or not capable of doing. You've found records, you've added records. Can you delete records?
You can delete records.
And
Yeah.
then I think the one thing that you mentioned specifically was you can't call a script, but make sure I got that right.
So you can't trigger a script with API.
So you couldn't say, Alexa, tell FileMaker to create a new contact and have a new contact script create a bunch of
Right.
related pertinent records.
So you can't do that directly. And the primary reason my understanding is they say that kind of thing is coming. They say we're going to expand that. Right now, if you can imagine, when you hit FileMaker server with an API call, it responds immediately, right? And so if there's a script running and doing something, it can't respond with useful information out of that script. If you're running a script that's doing a bunch of calculation and doing a report and it's supposed to spit a number back out at you, the API is already gone. The API call is gone, back through Lambda, gone, in this case. So it can't give you a response to that script. Now, what you can do, a workaround, is with a robot file, right? So I could set up some process where I say, when I tell it, create a new contact, what it actually does is it goes in and it creates in a table, a queue table, a new record queue. And then I have a robot file that's looking for new records to appear in that table. And when it sees one, it grabs that table and it does all the work of creating that new record.
And so we have good experience with doing that.
Right.
With other things,
Right.
not necessarily.
So
with Alexa.
there's a workaround. There's totally a way. You're not going to be able to get right now. You wouldn't be able to get, in this case, the Alexa to respond back with all the information of the result of that script. But you could trigger the script. Something I actually thought about maybe trying to do it for this is where I say, create a new appointment on this date, and it emails me a reminder. That's very easily done. All I have to do is have a robot looking for new records in the appointment table, and when it sees one, emails me information about that new appointment. That's super easy to do. So there's workarounds. You can trigger scripts with it. It's just somewhat limited.
And you could have your Lambda function trigger a script through an XML request
Okay.
to the web publisher.
So
Yeah,
not
good
just the
point.
It wouldn't
API.
have to go through the data API.
That's true.
So that's
That's
an
true.
option, sure.
Yeah, and the Lambda can do curl functions and can do anything else that JavaScript can do, the Lambda can do. So yeah, you can do it that way.
Got to be other questions here. I'm wondering, one thing that you didn't show, but because your file is very simple, essentially, it sounds like it would be pretty simple to expand it so that we could be looking at relational records, right? Maybe being in context of people and looking at their related dates, I suppose, to say how many contacts have X orders within.
In that instance, you're only limited to what's on the layout.
Okay.
Remember, when you're doing the request, you're telling FileMaker a layout, not a table.
Okay.
So if you have a layout that has a portal with a field on it that's like related, I don't know, customers or whatever, and you send it that field name with a content, then it would go to that layout, stick that content in that field.
Or vice versa, being in that child record layout and displaying the contact's name through that, I suppose,
Yeah.
would be another way of doing it.
You would probably, in a real world scenario, you would have whole layouts that are nothing but Alexa layouts that have all the different ways that Alexa
Just
might
the
need to
fields
search
that
for
you
something.
might need, things like that. Okay. And so next month, you're doing this on Google, and following like you're doing it on Siri, is that right?
Yeah. I would bet I didn't look at all into any of those. I went to this first because I haven't, but the Amazon made it extremely easy. I mean, the hard part for me was learning the JavaScript, right? But as far as like hooking up this to the skill kit, to the Lambda, it was just, everything is just perfectly seamless. In fact, I was struggling last week when I was getting stuff together. I told Greg, I was like, I don't have a good way to do it with the voice. I can type it and show that it works, but I don't think I'm going to be able to, I can't publish the function. I can't make it actually use this. And he did a little bit of Googling. He's like, I think you can just do it. And I was like, and I never even tried it because I was like, there's no way it's that easy. But it turns out if you have this registered to the same account as your developer account, as soon as everything is up and hosted and saved, you can just be like, ask FileMaker, and it works. And it's like, what? That's amazing.
Now publish it. So since you did it within your developer account, And that's attached to your account, your Amazon account, I assume. That it's just automatic. It doesn't
Right.
have to be published.
Yeah, this one that I was demonstrating tonight is not published. It's in test mode. Yeah, it has not been published.
Very cool.
So I guess technically you'd never have to publish it. I mean, it would still work. I've never run into any limitations where they say you can only use it for so long or anything like that. One downside I could possibly think of is like, you notice sometimes it misunderstood me and went to my Google Calendar or something like that. I would think maybe that's less likely to happen if it's an actual published skill kit, but it works.
Yeah, I was actually surprised because it almost seemed like you said exactly the same thing the second time and the second time.
And if you go back and look at the logs, I actually found this one time. I said, ask FileMaker, blah, 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 blah. And it responded to me with my Google Calendar. And I went and looked at the logs and it heard me to say, ask FileMaker. It heard exactly what I said, but it went to Google. And so I think it's something with the fact that it's in testing. It's not actually registered on some place somewhere. And I tried to just kind of run back home to mommy and get what I think it got. I also think the word appointments is no doubt, in the skill kit that runs Google Calendar, no doubt appointments is one of their slot types, right? So I'm pinging up against that when I say appointments. That's one of the things that Google's listening for. So it tries to hear me have said something to Google. I don't know if you'd have to get fancy, be like, look, you can interact with your appointments table, but you got to call it meetings. You can't call it appointments. If you call it appointments, it's going to go to Google. I don't know. It would take further testing.
So are there any limits on how long that Lambda function can run? So you put a loop in there and just let it run forever.
Well,
Just for instance.
I don't think so. I mean, I think you could, like, if you put it in listening mode, right, where it was waiting for that intent, it could listen. It probably has a timeout on it, but essentially you could do that. You have up to 3.2 million free minutes a month.
I was thinking more something
Is it
where
minutes or seconds?
if you were trying to set like a WebSocket or something where, so you trigger the function to start and it just starts feeding data in FileMaker and it just keeps running and running and running until you shut it off somehow.
Yeah,
Maybe like a time limit on that. I mean, where they just keep racking up charges once you.
I think they would let you just keep racking up charges. They probably wouldn't complain.
Of course.
Yeah. I didn't research to see what kind of timeout functions are on there or anything. The most of the calls I think I looked at the log on the Lambda function itself or something like that, and most of my calls were taking like 0.7 of a second to process. I have 3.8, 3.2 million to work with. So obviously I'm nowhere near getting charged for anything, but.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Yeah, for recording.